Welcome to Intelligent Investor Insights with Joshua Barone, your host and guide through the noise of today's markets. Here, we interpret the data behind the headlines, break down what's driving the economy and interest rates, and help serious investors make decisions rooted in clarity, not emotion. If you're looking for disciplined, research-driven insight to strengthen your portfolio, you're in the right place.
Hey everyone, welcome to the show. I'm Josh Barone. Today, I want to take a blowtorch to one of the most sensationalized, overhyped narratives floating around the real estate market right now. You've probably seen the headlines screaming about the Silver Tsunami. The idea is that 70-something million baby boomers are suddenly going to dump their homes onto the market all at once, triggering a catastrophic housing crash that makes 2008 look like a walk in the park. It makes for great clickbait. But as a deep value guy who was practically raised on credit cycles, I look at that and just shake my head. My dad, Dr. Robert Barone, taught me early on that if you don't understand the underlying flows, you're just guessing. And the reality of this demographic shift isn't a sudden destructive tidal wave. It's a slow, persistent, multi-decade drip. Let's look at the plumbing of how this actually works. There's a massive, critical difference between a gross demographic event, like a homeowner passing away or moving into assisted living, and an actual market-visible listing that impacts local inventory. If a boomer passes away and leaves their home to a child who decides to rent it out or move in themselves, that home never hits the multiple listing service. It doesn't put downward pressure on prices. Or what if the home sits in probate for 18 months because the heirs are fighting over who gets the grandfather clock? That is a gross demographic exit, but the net market impact is zero for a year and a half. That's why we engineered the Barone Boomer Inventory Index. It's not a panic button. It's a disciplined, flow-based risk screening tool designed to track how these structural demographic shifts gradually manifest as real physical supply in specific regional markets over the next 10 to 15 years. To understand the scale of what we're tracking, we have to look at the cold, hard data. According to the US Census American Community Survey, and research from Fannie Mae, older Americans, specifically those born between 1946 and 1964, own about 32 million owner-occupied homes across the country. That represents roughly 2/5 of all owner-occupied housing stock in the United States. Think about that for a second. That is an enormous concentration of real estate wealth held by a single generational cohort. Now, the actuaries tell us that over the next decade and a half, we are going to see roughly 13 to 14 million of these homes transition out of boomer ownership due to natural aging, healthcare needs, or mortality. When you hear 14 million homes, it sounds terrifying, right? But as an advisor, my job is to underwrite for realistic supply-demand dynamics. You have to spread those 14 million homes over 15 years. That's less than 1 million homes a year nationwide. In a healthy national market that absorbs 5 to 6 million transactions annually, that's not a tsunami. It's a manageable stream. But, and this is the huge but that most macro analysts miss, real estate is hyper-local. Those 32 million homes aren't evenly distributed. They are heavily concentrated in specific retirement havens, legacy suburbs, and Rust Belt communities. Underwriting for the apocalypse means finding where those structural leaks are going to pool into local gluts. And that's exactly what the index is built to isolate. To build a repeatable, systematic index that doesn't rely on guesswork, we had to map out the exact journey a home takes from being boomer occupied to hitting the market. We call this the 4-layer flow framework. It's the core methodology of our index, and it prevents the classic analytical error of double counting or ignoring time lags. Layer 1 is the gross demographic exit. This is the raw actuarial trigger event, a death, a cognitive decline diagnosis, or a voluntary decision to downsize. But as I said, Layer 1 is just the top of the funnel. Layer 2 is the market visible listing. This is the crucial step where the property actually gets listed on the MLS or sold to an institutional buyer. This is where we account for the massive friction points like state-specific probate delays, trust structures, and family transfers. Layer 3 is transaction absorption. How long does the home sit on the market? Does it sell in 10 days? Or does it languish for 6 months because the property hasn't been updated since 1978 and needs $80,000 in renovations? Finally, layer 4 is net inventory impact. This is where we measure the final residual inventory. By tracking the flow step by step through these 4 layers, we can see exactly where the bottlenecks are, and more importantly, we can project when a demographic exit today will actually show up as a price-depressing listing tomorrow. Now let's get into the actual mathematics of the index. How do we turn these concepts into a standardized, comparable metric? We do this through 2 key formulas. First, we calculate the boomer release rate, which is the number of observed boomer-owned home sales or listings in a given quarter divided by the total estimated pool of boomer-owned homes in that specific zip code or metropolitan statistical area, multiplied by 1,000. This gives us a standardized rate per 1,000 boomer-owned homes. It allows us to compare a small retirement enclave in Arizona directly to a massive suburban county in Ohio. But the real magic happens when we calculate the excess boomer release. This is where we compare the observed boomer release rate against an age-adjusted historical baseline. If a zip code has an older demographic profile, we expect a higher baseline rate of listings due to natural mortality and retirement patterns. But if the observed release rate spikes well above that age-adjusted baseline, the index flags it as an anomaly. This excess boomer release tells us that something else is happening. Maybe property taxes jumped. Maybe local healthcare infrastructure is struggling. Or maybe heirs are dumping properties rapidly to cash out. This metric flags regional supply surges long before they show up in lagging aggregate national real estate reports. Building an index like this requires a serious multi-tiered data architecture. We couldn't just rely on standard delayed MLS feeds. We designed a 3-phase forensic data pipeline to feed our models. Phase 1 is our public data prototype. This uses aggregate census ACS data, CDC mortality tables, and scraping of public portals like Redfin and Zillow to establish our initial baselines. It's useful, but it's too high level to make high conviction investment decisions. That's why we built Phase 2, which integrates vendor-enriched transaction databases from providers like Atom and CoreLogic. This allows us to look at individual deed transfers, tax assessments, and geographic identifiers. We can track when a property that has been held by the same owner for 35 years suddenly transfers via a warranty deed. Finally, Phase 3 is our forensic tracking layer. This is where we pull probate court filings, senior housing transition announcements, and specialized estate sale registrations. By combining these 3 phases, we get a real-time, highly granular picture of the supply pipeline before the sign even goes up on the front lawn. When we analyze the incoming data, we classify the supply into 4 distinct channels because each channel has its own velocity and price sensitivity. The first channel is downsizing, which is highly discretionary. If interest rates are high, a boomer might choose to stay put rather than trade a 3% mortgage for a 7% one. The second channel is care transitions, moving to assisted living or nursing care. This is far less discretionary and often highly time sensitive. The third channel is estate sales following a death, which are often highly price insensitive because heirs are frequently looking for a quick liquidation rather than holding out for top dollar. The fourth channel is financial distress, which can be triggered by rising healthcare costs. Now, tracking these channels is incredibly challenging. In many states, properties are held in revocable living trusts, or LLCs, which completely obscures the age of the underlying beneficial owner on public deeds. Furthermore, probate processes vary wildly by state. In a state like California, probate can drag on for a year or more, while in other states, it's wrapped up in a few months. To handle this noise, our model assigns a probability-weighted confidence score to each tracked property based on auxiliary data like tax exemption statuses or mortgage age, ensuring we don't misattribute the source of the listing. Let's wrap up by looking at how this math translates into actionable risk management. If we start with the baseline of roughly 31.5 million boomer-owned homes, our models project an average annual listed supply of about 945,000 homes nationwide over the next decade. To turn this into local warning signals, the Barone Boomer Inventory Index uses a three-tiered threshold framework: green, yellow, and red. Green zones are stable markets where excess boomer release is within one standard deviation of the historical baseline. Yellow zones represent markets where release rates are 1 to 2 standard deviations above baseline, often accompanied by a rising percentage of listings featuring price cuts, what we call the price cut premium. Red zones are the critical warning areas where excess release exceeds 2 standard deviations and local absorption capacity is falling. For real estate investors, lenders, and financial advisors, these thresholds aren't about screaming that the sky is falling. They are about portfolio defense. If you're holding a concentrated position in a red zone market, it's a signal to de-risk, tighten your underwriting, and prepare for a buyer's market. It's about being the disciplined investor who waits, reads, and understands the plumbing of the system while everyone else is panicking over headlines. Thanks for listening today. Keep your eyes on the data, ignore the tsunami hype, and remember that real wealth is engineered to last. I'm Josh Barone, and I'll catch you on the next episode.
Thanks for joining Joshua on Intelligent Investor Insights. If today's discussion raised questions about your portfolio strategy, risk exposure, or how to navigate this late cycle environment, we invite you to connect with us. We work directly with investors who want data-driven guidance, institutional-level analysis, and a partner in building durable wealth. Reach out to start the conversation and take the next step toward becoming a more informed, confident, and resilient investor. Until next time, stay rational, stay disciplined, and invest with intelligence.